Okay, so let's talk about this thing. The Sauron reveal was pretty obvious. Did we finally get to see any rings of power? I'm on episode, I think I finished episode 4, so I'm about halfway there, but the two of you finished the show, so did we? Because they weren't even hinting at a ring. We were just talking about the what do they call that thing that makes the rings? That's all I remember. That's
Oh,
The
Mithril.
yeah.
Well, no, that's what they make the rings with, right? Like I'm talking like what do they call it? The
Like
kiln or whatever
the
they're trying to
forge
build.
or something.
The forge, yes.
Yeah.
The
There
forge,
must be a
right.
kiln in the forge, but yes. Um, anyway, so you know how far behind I am, but I spoiled myself many times in terms of like I know basically what happens, and it's not like it doesn't seem like a lot of it is unexpected. They're kind of following like what the books say, or however much the books do say, at least. So the question that I had for you is you've been reviewing the show for the last, what is it, 7 weeks? They put out 2 episodes together. Yeah, 7 weeks. So let's say like 2 months. And so the Rings of Power, season 1 is now complete. So let's start by just kind of getting your initial, summary thoughts on how the season played out. And Mags, we can kind of start with you. Like, what did you think about season 1 of the Rings of Power?
Oh, meh. I mean, I really like. I was going to ask you, like, do we have permission to spoil it since you're like, you haven't finished it yet? But I know it's pretty, as you said, it was way too obvious. And I liked, A for effort. They really tried to make enjoyable, but I mean, we can go into the whole list of reasons why it didn't work. Like from lousy screenwriting and to editing to rolling R's that I'm sure we'll get into. Like it was. I mean, in our in our halfway season
Like
review, essentially,
mid-season
we sort of
review.
talk mid-season
Yes, that's what
review.
we called it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Exactly. Sorry. We sort of mentioned it like it actually would have been fine if they just didn't call it The Lord of the Rings. If they were just like a standalone fantasy series, I think they just raised the expectations of fans essentially, and they couldn't deliver based on that. But yeah, that's what I think. It's a shame. It's a real shame. Given the budget for sure. But yeah, Catriona, what about you?
I
Like,
mean,
do
obviously
you
the same. Like I'm in the same.
I don't
Yeah.
know, maybe finale has changed your your
No,
view on
no.
the show? No.
I was only happy because I knew it was the last one, so I was so done. I tried to feel something for somebody in the show, and there were moments where I was like, oh, I guess, if things had been done correctly, I could have felt something, but I just didn't. And
Yeah.
I felt like we were just being cheated, and it felt like, as an audience, like it's like it just felt like they thought we were so dumb that
Yeah.
they didn't really need to try that hard, and that we should still just like it. And it's like you said,
Less is more, right?
yeah.
Something that they should have followed. Like every scene was
Yeah.
trying to be super epic, and there was no need. It could have been done much simpler. Yeah.
It was like it's weird because it's like there's a level of it that felt like it was trying to be more epic than it should have, and then at the same time it wasn't epic enough. I was thinking like the moment where we reveal that Halbrand is Sauron, and then the whole leading up to the creation of the rings, and like that whole montage of making the rings is cool, although I do think the rings look like they were bought at like Claire's or something. But
that's what I mean. I specific about the ring, I rewatched the epilogue of the Lord of the Rings,
Yeah.
when Galadriel gives you the whole background and she talks about the 3 elven rings and stuff. I watched that and I was like, those rings look so much more powerful. They look so tacky and cheap.
I know. And
yeah,
I was just thinking, like, I didn't rewatch that scene from the beginning of the Lord of the Rings, but I was thinking about it and just remembering every time I'd rewatch the Lord of the Rings and how it felt what was epic about it was the mystery behind it, and being like, wow,
Yeah.
that must have been such a cool time to live through, and how crazy and dark everything must have been. And then to watch the reality of it, I mean, it's not the reality, but it's
Yeah.
Amazon's reality version, and it just felt like they really they downplayed everything, and they ruined the mystery and the epicness of it, which made me feel
Yeah.
like, what was the point of it if you weren't going to make it feel as cool as that 5-minute
Yeah.
So
Absolutely. And we've tried it. That's what I mean. We actually lowered, we kept saying this, we lowered our expectations
right.
enough that we gave it a shot. And the first episode was actually somewhat enjoyable. And
Yeah.
Dan, because you're quite fresh still, like, I know you see the problems with it, but I know you genuinely like it because it's well done. Like, it's well done stylistically. It's polished. Yeah.
Well, I mean, given the amount of money they were putting into it, I mean, and the trailers, like it was pretty obvious the show was always going to look good. Some of the things that I really liked about the show, and I'll address your critiques too, but some of the things that I really liked about the show, and then again, I have not only seen half of the season so far. So, although that's technically not true, because since I've sort of been involved with the review editing process and uploading and everything, so I've seen like parts of episodes 5 to 8, but in general, I feel like what they did well was they did not overuse CGI. And then when they did use CGI, it was used well, and then all the CGI looked good. Like actually ended
Yeah.
up over the last couple of months spending a lot more time than I probably should have watching She-Hulk. Certainly more time than I've spent watching this. Or actually,
I'm
to be
so
fair, the 4 episodes worth of runtime of Lord of the Rings of Power is probably equivalent to like all 9 episodes of She-Hulk anyway. But having said that, I really did, that show has CGI issues where like the quality of the CGI literally varies from scene to scene or shot to shot within the same scene even. In this show, it just, whenever you had CGI, I mean, so you could really, because, hey, humans can kind of tell, like clearly they did not shoot that for real. So you can kind of tell where the CGI is. I mean, there are obviously
Yeah.
scenes and shots where the CGI is just hidden because of how well it's done. But even when you notice, like, when the show Numenor, like with these big sweeping shots and like the boats or the
Yeah.
ships coming in, and or like, when they're on the ships and you're seeing them on the deck, like pulling rope and stuff and putting the sails up and whatever. And you could tell like parts of the ocean are obviously like, the horizon line and everything, all that CG. It was done really well. So I really appreciated the execution of the CGI, and I think they didn't overuse it because
Do
like
you,
for some of the costumes and stuff, it just felt
but
like,
speaking of CGI, Dan, do you know
yeah.
where you could really appreciate the CGI, or I was most impressed with how they did Balrog. Like Balrog was, it felt Peter
Yes.
Jackson Balrog, but at the same time it had very nice polish to it, and it completely made me believe that creature like this exists. Yeah.
Yes, and that's, I think, simply because, what was it? How long has it been? Like almost 2 decades? Not really 2 decades, but like a decade and a half since the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, of films were released. So the amount of progress we have made in terms of what CGI today can do versus what it can do back then. You go back and watch. I mean, those Lord of the Rings movies, I never watched, and this is where I'm the novice in the franchise. I've still to this day not seen the entirety of the original trilogy. I've even only just seen parts of the Hobbit trilogy, which overused CGI. That was like if Peter Jackson's original trilogy was like the original Star Wars trilogy, The Hobbit was like the Star Wars prequel trilogy in terms of how heavy they went in the other direction.
I felt
But
nauseous after seeing it at the cinema. I came out of there and I'm like, I feel like I'm going to be sick. Not because of how bad it was, but because it was just so much.
Right. It was too much. But I will say this, even though the original Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy gets a lot of praise for not overusing CGI and then doing a lot of miniatures and stuff, simply because, the technology just wasn't there, or at least it would have cost way, way more money than they even ended up spending to have way more CGI than they actually had. But like, to me, that Lord of the Rings CGI from back in that time does not hold up nearly as well today, because in some scenes you could just tell they're trying to hide some of like the limitations of the technology that they had available to them by shooting certain, especially the large scale scenes, in a certain way.
Yeah.
And like color grading them in a certain, like, there's parts of that movie that feel like you're watching 300, and I feel like
Yeah.
maybe that's
And
not
also
exactly what Tolkien
you were
intended.
about to
you know.
You were also about to say something about costumes, and that's
But
what the series has
yeah,
been hugely criticized, that the
Mhm.
costumes just don't live how they've been lived through. Every costume looks like it's just fresh off the rack. And like as you know, like I'm reviewing Andor, and that's something I just keep repetitively praising Andor for, that every single costume feels like it's been man-made or passed through generations. It all feels very organic, and something that, do you think that would have helped the series if we had a bit of more attention
well,
to details in there?
so the way I've been looking, so again, 4 episodes in, and I've seen, some significant parts of the rest of the series, but not enough. Well, I'm assuming the costumes don't change, but they don't like all of a sudden. It's not like they're making these 10, 15-year time jumps like in
No.
House of the Dragon. So, uh, I just got the feeling that this show was trying to give off this effect that this is a very much like the peak of their prime kind of a world, like pretty far away from the last dark age and a good distance away from the next one that we know comes to pass with Sauron and all that. So they wanted to show a world that was more pristine, and that's probably where like the overall production design direction came from. The cost in terms of like the quality of the costumes, I mean, like they didn't spare any expense. Like this is it looked great. And the one thing I was worried about with this show, what happens a lot with fantasy shows and movies today, is they go CGI heavy, but then they also overproduce some of the costumes. So what you end up seeing is like this sort of like this artificial look where I always appreciated like when they made like the Robin Hood movie in the 90s. Like there was a certain like real quality to it because they just like, you felt like you could go and put this together yourself if you had enough money. Like I think so it didn't get so far out of hand for me in terms of the costume design that it felt like it was done like it wasn't tangible, I guess is the words maybe to
So
use.
so wait, so you're saying that you think that the quality of the Rings of Power, the costumes do look good? Like you
Yes,
think
I
like that's so
I
funny. I actually I thought they looked terrible
no,
in
well,
some.
Yeah.
so what I mean,
Like
so
Manic.
what I'm
It
trying to
was like
defend
Party
the
City.
I think the issue is less of a do they objectively look good or bad. I think it's more of like I said, like if you think about this like the prequel, like more closer to the prequel Star Wars trilogy where everything was meant to look like it was brand new, not like the lived-in Star Wars of the old. This feels like that. It's not meant to, I guess, feel like the Lord of the Rings trilogy where you're living in a time of oppression. It feels like more of a pristine world. I mean, I guess what I'm intending, what I'm leading to here is as the show goes on into its next seasons, like they're gonna like dirty up like just watch. I've seen shots from the
I
last
mean, I hope
episode,
so, but
and they
the
look
thing is
like
Harfoots.
everything
But
got
even
worn down.
Harfoots, even though they didn't have gold or silver, I just did not believe 1 second that they lived in those clothes. It was costume. I feel like
Yeah.
that the
Dan, you
magic is gone. Like as much as they tried to
yeah.
cover it with CGI or like beautiful setting, that's something that Hobbit had. Hobbit actually did make sure that every costume looked like those dwarves really lived in that. It was over CGI'd, but things like costumes, they did help this magic. Our cinema's all
I
about
don't know, there was
magic and the
weight
I'm
to
show.
gonna
it.
And
Like
I'm gonna argue that
they're
that's not the
very.
case. I didn't get that.
Dan,
Like
you'd
I
be
you,
thought
such a good manager
you don't
for
get it. It's all
defending.
objective.
I couldn't. I literally could not. Okay, honestly, I've not seen the entirety of either of The Hobbit or The Lord, like because I mentioned, and none of the previous trilogies. I have not seen them in their entirety, but I've seen enough of them that I could not distinguish like the level of like quality or like. I mean, basically, if I could imagine a Hartford from this show walking into one of those, any of those 6 movies, and it wouldn't seem like they didn't fit because overall I felt like the design matched enough. If anything, there was more attention to detail here, and I think the one thing okay, this is coming from clearly somebody who's not a fan inherently of like Lord of the Rings franchise, maybe in a way that I am a fan of like say the Stargate franchise or something like that. So I don't feel like the sense of nostalgia about it, and so I don't feel like there was a definitive take that they have to match. And to that end, I feel like this just feels like an updated, more upscale, higher quality version of what we have gotten in the past. And that's kind of
But
how I looked at it.
it's not, yeah. But the thing is, even things like script writing, like the script was painful to listen to.
That I
And
agree
you
with.
must agree with us
But
on that
no,
one.
'cause
Some of the scenes, it was just like, what are you talking about? It's like, I don't believe that you guys speak to each other like this. And then we were talking about accents as well. Yeah.
I have a pet peeve about rolling R's. When your natural accent does not kind of lean in that direction. Like I've got a American English accent at this point, but like I wasn't born in the US. So and when I don't speak English, I roll my R's in a different language. But when I'm speaking English, I generally don't roll R's. So if I were to like say a word where you would otherwise roll your R's, I don't really do that unless I'm speaking
Galadriel.
that same word in a different language, like usually names. But then in this show, it just like, yeah, Galadriel was the worst offender because like she's like Sauron, and like you could just hear the R's coming out, and
Sauron.
I'm just,
Yeah.
it took me out
He's a
of the show, you know?
servant of Morgoth.
Yeah, it's too much. It's because she has like the cleanest British accent. I don't know what, Mags, would you say, was that like a London kind of a thing? Like what kind of, because it seemed like it's
I
not like a
mean,
Manchester accent, right?
that's what I mean. She speaks very, very clean because I know her from, I remember, I keep bringing this film up that she was fantastic in it, like Saint Maud. That's why she's really talented actress, but it's almost like she's under so much pressure to get the character right and to sound the certain way. And I don't know if she was able to handle it. That's why the accent was one of the things she really started to play to in order to like do a better job, which in my opinion she didn't need to, because I think she's fully capable of like pulling this off. It's a shame. And speaking of Sauron, so I called it two episodes before the actual revelation that's Sauron, but that was one of my critiques. I wish that was hidden better. I think they've given me too many pieces to put it together. I wish there was and especially last episode we actually had, you know, the shots which show Halbrand, you know, looking at Galadriel, and like there was just too many clues for me. And I think maybe that would have actually maybe even saved the season for me if I was completely taken by surprise.
And not only that, but like the hinting at things like you know, to kind of wink at the audience thing, like when Halbrand says no, we're not making 2 crowns, we're making something small,
something else,
yeah,
smaller.
and
it's like a wink.
It's like why don't do that, like come on, be real, like
be subtle.
Yes. Yeah. And it's like, okay, so I mean, you could argue that maybe that was the hint that Sauron knows what his plan is, that he wants to make his plan all along, but then it's like, well, he's stupid as hell for doing that in the first place. Like, yeah, I think rings would be a really good idea. It's like it's Dr. Evil, like ring.
Exactly, but actually, exactly, it's Dr. Evil. But that's what actually I appreciated that the series brought me. Like, it did give me, it fills some gaps essentially. Knowing, sorry, my thingy died. Sorry about that. We got to see inside of Sauron's mind. And I absolutely love that, like to see his motivations, to get a bit of a background story, and seeing him as like a really broken person who thinks he's doing something for his own reality, which is like good, but it actually obviously it's not, because he's killing millions of people and stuff living in Middle Earth in order to get what he wants. But I really enjoy that expose, and I wish I almost had more of that. So I hope we'll see the whole transformation from the like human looking like Sauron to actually Sauron in this full suit. You know, like I'm kind of excited to see like the journey between the two.
That's an interesting take, because like I mean, you saying that's a good point. For me, I feel like the fact that they did go that route felt like it was another means to not take any risks with how they were telling their story, because that is a huge trope right now, like especially because, you know, it's like the prequels as if it's Star Wars, which is what they did with Anakin before he Darth Vader. And I'm not saying that that's not a good storyline, you know, and it is very interesting to see what pushes somebody to become so evil. I mean, he already was evil, Sauron. It's
Yeah,
not like he was tricked or anything, but and that's a good point.
yeah.
But
And
yeah,
how he managed to deceive, they always, I liked how, elves always talk about the enemy and they're deceiving and fooling and stuff. And you could really see him being like this puppet master. And
yeah.
I don't know, for like, I always appreciate a good villain. And I kind of got a little taste. So again, I think I'm turning into Dan. I'm starting to defend the series. But like, I actually am glad I got this little taste of what
You're saying that as
actually
if
they
it's the
could have
bad
done.
thing. I mean, come on.
No, it's
Can I
not.
can I make a couple of counterpoints? I was just gonna say this about the Sauron reveal, right? Like let's just play devil's advocate for a moment. Going into the show and like, kind of back when we got the first trailer, we figured out like who the cast is or like and then like what characters we're gonna see. They had this character of Halbrand, and we clearly like people pointed it out like straight away, like wait, there's no Halbrand in Lord of the Rings. Like who is this guy? So that right there was sort of like a giveaway, even though maybe that's not right when people start to speculate that is this a Sauron but like, I think it was kind of there from the beginning. So my question would be like, do you think they actually were trying to hide it? And then the way they treat how he starts behaving in the last couple of episodes, it's sort of like they've built it up to the point where it's almost like, it's not like they're trying to, I mean, because if they were trying to hide it, like I feel like they could have thrown in a couple of more red herrings our way, but
Yeah.
it feels like they didn't even try that. So do you think they even were trying to make it a twist, or was it more like they didn't want to insult the intelligence of the audience members who they knew at this point had, at least the people
I don't
who
know if
were
they cared about
knowledgeable of
the
the franchise
intelligence
figured it out?
of the audience based off of the rest of the
Just
show,
stuff.
but
They also did create some fictional characters. Isildur's sister. That's a new character. I remember reading about it.
Isildur's horse.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know.
That's-
I thought Halbrand was the only new character, but yeah, no,
No,
I
I
okay.
think that he had the brother in a book. But yeah, anyway, I wish, do you know what they actually should have left it when Adar, the first ever orc, essentially, he asked them, "Who are you?" And then Halbrand just gives him a look. That was when I thought, okay, this is Sauron. But if they just left it at that without giving those little him glancing at Galadriel, trying to investigate his background, like that was completely unnecessary. So no, to answer your question, I really don't think they were trying to hide it. They were really underestimating people's intelligence. That's what I mean. Some of the best, like
I
Andor,
think to the contrary, right? Like because if they were trying to, okay, so because like what the point I'm trying to make is, it wasn't like it was well hidden from the beginning. Like you didn't have to dig very hard to kind of connect the dots, and then like the way the character starts to act in the last few episodes, it's almost like they're
so
telling the
obvious.
audience, that this is Sauron. We're not going to try
It-
to insult your intelligence by pretending that it's not. I do
But it was
understand this is,
needless.
but the point that some of the things that you guys mentioned was the writing, like the dialogue, and like it's like really on the nose, and it's almost like they're winking at the audience, which feels like an MCU way of doing things that really feels out of place for this franchise. And to that end, I wanted to ask you something. You've mentioned this in your reviews. You've talked about the fact that the two showrunners here are basically newbies at this kind. I mean, look, this is the most expensive TV show of all time. But even if it wasn't, like a show of this scale, of this ambition, and like this is meant to be like the cream of the crop prestige TV. So these two guys don't have nearly the experience that you would otherwise warrant putting them in charge of something like this. And I feel like, and I'll pose this as a question, but my opinion is I feel like some of the shortcomings in the writing, especially the dialogue, comes from that because they maybe think that this is the right way to do Tolkien dialogue. But you tell me, like you guys know the franchise better, was that a symptom of these two young people are just learning on the job, or was it like something else that affected the
Dan,
quality?
would you ever give me and Catriona 100 million or quarter of a billion and be like, can you make a TV series based on one of the most important fantasy franchises ever? I would not be surprised if they casted someone, I don't know, the showrunners of Game of Thrones, even though they got enough heat for the last few seasons, but that would have been a lot more
Well, because
I
they
mean, I
still
would
ran
hope
like
I
pure.
eight
do a better
seasons of the
job than
show.
these people. Yeah.
Huh?
I mean, they had a resume. Like they're coming at you saying we ran 8 seasons of Game of
Yeah.
Thrones, not like any random fan of Game of Thrones. Like hate it, like
Game
it
of
or hate the
Thrones.
last season. They ran that thing. I mean, like that's a resume.
They
I
ran it
so
into the ground.
it's not, and it's
Yeah.
these guys. I don't even know how many shows like they're pretty exec producer for. So, but granted, they're not the only two people in the writers' room, but they are like the two lead voices. Like everything runs through
Yeah.
them. So maybe somebody in the writers' room had like mentioned like, hey, this sounds really not
So
natural the way they're
we
talking,
also, but we also
but they
talked
got
about this.
overruled.
They had huge restrictions. They were only restricted to the appendix, as we know. And then the grandchild of Tolkien, he's like sort of like the head of the Tolkien estate right now. And apparently they've been sort of in a close collaboration with the like real estate and whatever they Tolkien estate real estate. So whatever they actually show them, they were happy. They were like satisfied enough to be like, yes. But my fear of that is that I think what they were shown were just images. I don't think no one ever looked at the actual script. Because that was the beauty of the Lord of the Rings, right, Catriona? Like it was so natural for people to speak, the wizard never arrives, and I can't
Mhm.
remember the actual quote, but like when the way Gandalf spoke, right? It was very
Yeah.
natural, and it made you believe so much into
Yeah. But
that character
natural,
existing.
but it was also, it was naturally like brilliantly written. And I'm thinking, in yesterday's episode, the last episode, that however the stranger, who, I mean, there, I guess, is Gandalf, I'm not sure, by the way, like everybody's like, but the audience shouldn't be stupid enough to not think it's Halbrand, and here I am thinking it's probably the stranger is Sauron. But anyway,
Yeah.
he's talking to Nori at the end, and they're trying to recapture this clever little Gandalf talking to a hobbit, like cute
Yeah.
moment. And I mean, maybe you could give the excuse that, the stranger just got his memory back and everything, so he's still trying to learn how to, and capture his own personality. But all he
Yeah.
says to Nori is something like, just follow your nose or something. And I'm like, what? Like, that's not. When has
That's not
Gandalf ever
Gandalf.
said?
Yeah.
No,
It's
so,
like they actively have been destroying every sense of magic they were trying to build up.
yeah.
I know this is such a loaded statement, but that's how I felt. Like every scene, every moment that I was actually giving it a try, they somehow managed to pull me out and sort of just say, hey, okay, we're that dumb. We're actually going to
Yeah.
destroy that for you. And it's like, I know you
Yeah.
meant well, but I mean, for this amount of money, this like such a responsibility, like get someone who at least knows how to make cinema. We're not
Yeah.
lacking in directors, and it's not the question of original IP. It's about what you decide to do based on what fuels your own imagination versus what actually is considered the good cinema. Because I much rather watch a good piece of episode which has no relation to Tolkien whatsoever, rather than be dragged through this. And really, I mean, people say this, it's like an insult to what Tolkien has produced, his
Right.
life's work. And yeah,
Right.
like
And
I much rather, yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say the constant excuse is, well, it's not really Lord of the Rings, so like you can't look at it as that. But then it's like, well, then why? Why are we? Like,
Yeah.
why are you doing this to us?
Why are you doing this to us?
I'll just say this. There is an interesting conversation to be had, and I think it's too big of a conversation to have right now, but of this idea that, okay, well, yes, the Lord of the Rings books, they're adapting entire books, but like a book is not written like a script for a movie. So they did still have to write a lot of dialogue, like that was brand new, that was
Yeah,
never in the book.
everything.
but it just felt like they had more material to work with, so they could make it sound more in line with the original books. Whereas here, obviously, they're having to kind of invent their way through a lot of the story. But at the same time, I guess like the topic that really would be maybe a conversation of its own is, do you, in that situation, are you like obliged, or maybe is it your duty to stick to what the fans sort of know about the franchise from before, and therefore you don't have kind of the freedom to maybe reinvent the way maybe these characters, like say for example, talk, simply because there's another iteration of this franchise that exists before? Do you have to line it up with that pre-existing adaptation, or can you
I mean,
experiment? Or
They had two franchises. That's the another mind-blowing
right.
thing, because they also, The Hobbit felt like Lord of the Rings. It was
Mhm.
but it was
destroyed
the
through
same
special effects.
creators, right? So I mean, like Peter Jackson was involved. Like
Yeah.
here, like I will, but I'm just simply posing the question, and you can make this rhetorical, or you can answer it. Maybe, and again, it could be a big conversation unto itself. That shouldn't they be allowed to maybe have some creative freedom to kind of redefine what Tolkien sounds like? It's kind of like the Roman like language, like it was okay, not
Yeah.
well, Latin, for example, right? Like it's a dead language. We don't truly know what it sounded like. We sort of kind of imagine that it maybe sounded like it's some form of
Sure.
Italian, but
Absolutely. But does it work, Dan? I don't mind them
Right.
becoming its own thing, but it has to work. And
Well, and we
right.
have
Well,
the
yeah.
Yeah.
original books are the Bible to reference. And I mean, if we have, I mean, Elven language is a made-up language that people have managed to create, and people speak it and stuff. And if you can do stuff like that, you should be able to read a bunch of books and then be able to and capture the way those people speak and manage to push that through a series. You know,
Yeah.
not with such difficulty. If you
Yeah.
really research the material, take notes, you know, write it down, like try to
And
get in the head of how they speak.
But I completely agree with you, Catriona, but I also understand, Dan, like I really am not opposed to having something new. If they, I don't know, started speaking completely different language, make it, or try to do something quirky about it. It's all going back to at least have a decency, not call it Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Because that,
Well, I mean,
if
the
they
whole
just
point
called
of
the
it is
series
it's an
Rings of Power,
adaptation. I think like that would be like
but it didn't work. But
well, right.
that's what I was trying to tell you earlier. Like if at least the language and this whole new approach worked on the audience, if they actually made it interesting, by all means, go ahead, throw in
So
new dragons even and stuff. Make a Game of Thrones reference. Do whatever you want. Just don't tell me it's rain. Don't piss on me and tell me it's raining.
okay, well, you're making
Yeah.
some bold statements there, but all right, I get it, and that's fair. I mean, look, they can try something differently from the way it's been done before, and like Catriona, you made a good point that again they could still look at the other Lord of the Rings books. They're part of the legendarium. Like it may not be exactly like what their story they're adapting, but it is basically in line with it. And it's not like Tolkien all of a sudden started writing books differently at a certain part of his life. In fact, these are the appendixes, so like they're basically part of the same books. I get that. I mean, so maybe where the writing kind of fell short, and like I had to kind of like reorient my brain after episode one, because I'm like they're talking like Shakespearean Old English, kind of like what the like what am I watching? Because I'm not used to it. I'm like a sci-fi person, so like I like people talk more direct, and it's just I had to
Yeah.
adjust. And then eventually I kind of like it, just like, you know, like okay, I get it, like this is how they talk, and it's you kind of get into it. But
Yeah.
and again, I don't have the context of all the other movies, so to me it didn't stand out as much. But you know, fair point. There are a lot of people who are coming to this having seen the previous movies. So anyway, and we can talk about this particular, like any part of the show, like forever. So I have a couple other questions to kind of before we finish up, and that the one question is, where do you think the show's going now in season 2? Like we know now who Sauron is. I feel like the stranger is still sort of a stranger. We don't quite know who he is. But then where is the story going next season?
Well, we know he's one of the wizards for sure. So I mean, that was kind of obvious. And I'm actually glad they're still playing with this idea that we don't know who the stranger is. As I said before, I'm looking forward to finding out more about Sauron process. I think every chance that every series has to investigate a problematic, maybe slightly deep character is like a good way to go. So I'm definitely looking forward to see more of a Halbrand slash Sauron in under the microscope, but everything else I'm sort of done with. I have no idea what they can surprise me with. They tease that there's going to be some really cool characters coming back from the original text, but that's my fear. Like, why do you keep on antagonizing fans with all those like, hey, we're going to bring in the new cool character, but we're going to absolutely destroy him for you by not sticking
but
to
you're
what
making
the
an assumption
Bible
there
says.
that they'll destroy the character they're bringing
Oh,
back.
I mean, I think based off of this first season, we cannot get our hopes up again.
Fair enough. But
Yeah.
I'll give them the chance to improve. But okay, go ahead, Catriona.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I'm not to sound like too horrible, but I'm fingers crossed that something happens to Bronwyn where like maybe we just never see her again. You know, she doesn't have to die, but like I just don't
I
ever
feel
want
like
to
you're
see
just
her.
rude to this character.
We
Like,
just don't like
What
what has
Bronwyn.
she done wrong? I've
Do
again
you know
not
what
seen
she
the
did
whole
wrong?
season.
She
She
gave you like Aragon-worthy speech to people like, we should stay and fight. It's like, you're
I felt like the
like
setup was
a
there.
farmer.
She was because she was like basically the only person with a spine in that whole town, even though like, you know, there's a bunch of these guys who are way bigger than her in size and were might like I just felt like they were building her up to be that sort of like a general who can kind of lead the
But wasn't
charge.
that Galadriel's role in the
But she
show?
Exactly.
she didn't get to the town until pretty deep into the season. I'm talking about like she's one of the people from like the tribes of man or whatever. So you know like whereas Galadriel would almost be frowned upon because the humans don't really trust the elves, at least the humans in the Southlands. So I just felt like they were building her up to be that like character. So to me it came natural, but that's just me. I don't know. I I I maybe
And
they'll kill her off
they
for
completely
some
forgot
narrative
her
reason.
in the final episode.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad they did. I was like, oh, thank God.
If the episode felt straight away better, if there's no Arondir and Bronwyn drama. Yep, agree.
Yeah.
Alright.
Look, I don't have any problem with that storyline. It is just how all three of those characters, Theo, Bronwyn, and Arondir, there's no personality to them. I don't really know like what's so interesting about Arondir. I mean, he's just brave. I mean, every elf is brave, right? They all are. And then what else is there to him? And then Bronwyn, she's a mother and she gives speeches, you know, and what else is there? Theo,
Yeah.
he has this staff that is a part of the connects to the whole story, which is important. What else is there? That's it.
Okay. Do you know what's prediction? Actually my dad's a huge Tolkien fan. Shout out to Dad. Do you know he bets on that one of the witch king of Angmar or one of the Nazguls is going to be Theo.
Oh, I hope.
Yeah,
I'd
so
like
that's why
something interesting
Theo's, you know, obsession with darkness and kind of think he's going to be easily deceived by Sauron. And I think Halbrand and Theo actually did have Halbrand and Theo actually had like this small interaction when the whole thing was
the Mount Doom
happening in the
blew up.
Highlands.
And
Yeah, before
sort of, yeah.
that was epic though. Okay, in all defense, that was epic. That was a cool scene.
By the way, speaking of things that weren't surprises or surprises that we saw coming, I guess the Mount Doom thing and how they turned the Southlands into Mordor. I feel like if there was anything executed well in this in terms of being like, oh wait, what? Wasn't that it? Like shouldn't we give the show credit for doing that well?
Yeah,
Like
that was cool. But again, I mean, the logistics of it, there's a lot, you know, like then I'm sorry. I know, like I'm
No.
yes,
like that was cool, but
cool.
okay.
But I mean, you know, it's like the reality is all the townspeople, most of them were fine. And it's like they were in the blast radius.
Bronwyn didn't die.
Nobody died. And it's like all of these logistics things that like should realistically kill something. Like, okay, in this last episode, the beginning of the episode, Galadriel shows up with Halbrand. He's injured. And she says, we've been riding for 6 days straight, no breaks. I'm like, those horses would have died. Like, you know, by day, like they can't run.
Maybe no, if they're elven horses, this is my nerd brain.
Right.
if they're elven horses, they can do that. Like Aragorn's horse was pretty, like, but
Yeah.
we had more empathy. Speaking of horses, we had more understanding and empathy for these horses than Isildur's horses, who's FYI completely missing. It's like they decided to drop
Well,
the
he let it
Isildur
go, right?
storyline, and
Yeah.
we don't know. Like, we know he's alive, obviously, because he's gonna play a big role later on. But it's to not enough to even. Yeah. Anyway. We can go on, but
Yeah.
I mean,
What,
hopes for the future. Yes, I'll definitely watch it then, because I want to know more about Middle Earth. But yeah, it's going to be difficult not to like. I wonder if the viewership's going to be there for second season.
this show has been doing so well, and I've not heard anything about like the viewership dropping off. It's like there's a global audience for this that in some ways is even bigger than Game of Thrones. And speaking of like House of the Dragon, like it's been matching almost what the House of the Dragon's been doing, and then beating it in
It's all
a
the
lot of
YouTuber
markets.
reviews.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
just
just
everybody.
our channel, like,
doing.
I don't know how, if accurately this reflects the actual interest in the show, but like when we have been uploading reviews for this show and uploading reviews for House of the Dragon, we've been getting a lot more interest for the Rings of Power reviews than we have been for the House of the Dragon. And again, I mean, we're a relatively small channel still, but
It's because we're doing a great job, Dan.
maybe, hey, I'll give you credit. I gotta say, when Catriona channels are in Galadriel, it's really neat to listen to. So
No, you didn't pronounce it right, Dan. Galadriel.
Galadriel.
Come on.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it's.
Yes.
Some of the critiques have been really neat to look. Like honestly, the horse, like, oh, there he goes. So I love watching those reviews. Okay, so to kind of like wrap this whole conversation up, we've talked about where the show is going. We've talked about how things began and everything in between. But I did want to kind of touch upon this briefly. The show, season 1 was done mostly in New Zealand, which is where the Peter Jackson movies were done. Now they're moving production for season 2, which they just started, to England. Now Tolkien, when he wrote the books, I mean, he was a British man. He wrote the books in England. I don't think he had New Zealand in mind. It was really Peter Jackson who said, "Man, there's this beautiful country that I live in. Maybe I should film the movies here. It's probably also cheaper." And Veda came out of it and all that. But now that they're moving production to England, do you think that's A, going to have an effect on the show in terms of quality? And then B, like, is it even significant, or are we making, people are making, a big deal out of this? Should they even be doing that? I mean, does it matter where they're filming it as long as it kind of looks similar to what we have already seen?
I think it'll end up being like the only like truth to Tolkien effort that they're going to put into it. So, I mean, I guess there's that. As long as the landscapes, I mean, are they only filming in England? Are they filming just Britain, like Scotland as well?
I'm sure they're, I mean, well, yeah, I mean, the United Kingdom, so probably Scotland,
Okay,
Wales, England, Ireland,
They
Northern
must.
Ireland.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
Scotland's got the most scenic.
right. And
beautiful
that could work. Maybe if they're taking it in like a darker tone, not to say that I think that Scotland's a darker country than New Zealand, but
No.
It's a beautiful country.
There's something to it. It is, yeah. And there's something to it, the landscape. It's, yeah, I think, I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I agree with you. I don't think, because of the Hobbit trilogy, they really, again, they went back to New Zealand, and it's almost like they got rid of all the scenes, whatever they had to, or like whatever location they found it, they were like, oh, we wanted to shoot here, but we couldn't afford at the time. I think we've seen so much of in New Zealand now that I think it's going to be interesting to see different parts of it. And yeah, we are going to be seeing different places. We're not in Rivendell, we're not in, Misty Mountains. It is meant to look different. And to maybe answer the question whether England or Scotland can uphold the beauty of the Middle Earth, sure. I see that for sure.
Right.
So
it'd be a good location for like castles and stuff.
Yeah.
Ruins and things like that. What were you gonna say, Dan?
I was gonna say, look, England and Scotland and even Wales. I mean, they have the countryside is beautiful. I mean, I've been there. I mean, Mags, you've lived there. I've lived there much more briefly than you, but it's beautiful. Like Andor has shot a lot in England and Scotland for their season, and it looks beautiful. I'm sure they're gonna still film in other parts of the world. They've got the money to, certainly, but it seems like a lot of the soundstage stuff, at least, they're gonna do in England. I personally, I think that, look, they can only go up from here. If anything, I mean, and these guys now have one season under their belt, the executive producers. They can, hopefully, they'll improve. I'll give it a fair shot. Again, I still have to watch like all these like 4 episodes all the way through. I've seen them in parts, and the first four I've seen all the way through. I'm optimistic. We don't think we're gonna get the second season until like 2024, so it's gonna be a while. So if
We can
there's
calm
anybody itching for
down,
more, you know,
make
you're gonna
our
have to wait.
peace.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
But go ahead.
what's next? Like,
Well,
what's next for like, because you said this was like such a highly anticipated series and stuff. What do you think will be equivalent to the scale of this? Like, what should we watch out for?
I don't. Well, I guess there's gonna be Mandalorian season 3 where they're trying to retake Mandalore, so that looks pretty epic.
Yay.
I know they're doing a second season of Foundation. If you haven't seen that on Apple TV Plus, that looked the first season is great. Like, watch it if you
Great
haven't,
books.
and yeah,
Yeah.
it's like basically Star Wars borrows a lot of its stuff and a lot of its concepts from Foundation. It's been picked apart by other people and copied over the years to the point that it's like you go and watch Shakespeare and you're like, Romeo and Juliet. It's like every movie I've ever seen, like every tragedy or whatever. But like that was the first one. That's like Foundation in the sci-fi realm, like where it's been done so many times
Yeah.
since that you don't know. You're like, this isn't anything new, but it's because it was the OG of it all. Anyway, yeah, The Rings of Power. Hopefully it was a good experience for you. It wasn't too painful to watch and review the episodes every week.
It was great.
Is there anything else you guys would like to mention before we wrap up here?
No, I'm good.
This is like the moment in the
Nadia.
Zoom call where everybody just stops talking and we're like awkward silence. Okay. All right. Well,
No.
I'm looking
We're
forward to
good.
season 2, however long it takes to get here. I still have to finish season 1, obviously. Maybe I'll feel different after that. And it looks like the two of you are sort of in the middle. Like, are you gonna be watching when season 2 debuts?
I'm
I
gonna
will.
decide in 2 years when it comes out. I don't want to jump too quickly. I want to feel it out.
I know myself, and I think I will have enough time to forget and forgive. I mean, not forget, but definitely forgive, and then I'll give it a shot. Just because I want to see what's going to happen to Sauron. Like, I'm just very interested in his journey right now, and everyone else, it's like, nope. Can we have half of the recasts, and can we, just not do certain things? Yeah, I just hope they will learn the lessons from the season and the reception, and they really take fans into consideration, knowing how much of toxicity they created before the show even started. So yeah.
Well,
That's
they've
all
got 2
from my
years.
side.
Well, they're already shooting now, but like they've got plenty of time to learn from their mistakes and get
Yeah.
better. Yeah. Well, with that, I guess this is all we got time to do. Well, we actually went a lot longer than we wanted to. But hey, if you guys watched season 1 of The Rings of Power on Amazon Prime, you liked it, you didn't like it, let us know in the comments below. We have really appreciated that you come back every week to watch these reviews that we've been doing on the show. So we really do appreciate your time and then all the likes, and you'll take the dislikes. Leave us a comment. Tell us what we were doing wrong, what we could do better. But with that in mind, hey, we're still reviewing Andor. We're still reviewing House of the Dragon. A lot of people don't like what Andrew has to say about that, but we do enjoy the comments, that roast Andrew's takes. We've got a lot more to come on the channel in the coming weeks and months. There's Black Adam and Black Panther, Avatar: The Way of Water. So I'll be looking forward to Max and Catriona's reviews on those. But in the meantime, like, subscribe, leave a comment below, and thanks for watching our coverage of The Rings of Power. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.